Guys, I'm back with James O'Keefe, author of the new book, American Muckraker. We're talking about muckraking journalism, 21st century style. James, let's start with something very interesting you say in the book. You say that the conservative movement has failed the demoralized. And by the demoralized here, you mean the people who believe in justice but don't believe that the world is just. These are people who believe that institutions have let them down and that the truth is being squashed by lies. And I think what you're saying is that the conservative movement of the 1970s and 80s has become what? Calcified, ossified, institutionalized? Talk about that for a moment.
Well, I mean, I would say two things, Dinesh. I quote Charles Murray in this book that government is in an advanced state of sclerosis where solutions are outside the legislative and judicial processes, that the pendulum swings back and forth, it goes. And I reject the premise, and I think the conservative movement, first of all, they're very defensive. They're very, if the lib media wasn't doing anything today, I don't know what they would talk about. And you have to be willing to go on, for lack of a better word, offense. You have to be proactive, not reactive. You have to break news. But I think, Dinesh, you said it best. I actually quote you in this book. I hope I attributed the quote to you, but I will do so now, that the conservatives fear the terrifying and humiliating power of the press so much that even though they know it's false, there's a sort of perverse incentive not to do the right thing and not to tell the truth for fear of being given that scarlet letter. I mean, CNN is a laughingstock, obviously. The chyrons are absurd, but we understand and revere their ability to shame us. And because they control the levers of Google and Twitter and Facebook, it's a slippery slope, I've found, because people will hesitate to speak the truth for fear of losing their Twitter account. And they may not admit it, but deep down inside, of course they fear admitting that. So the moment you stop, and there's a chapter in this book called Power, where I confront the executive editor of the Dean Baquet. I was actually speaking at a journalism conference alongside Marty Baron and Dean Baquet, and I go to shake Dean Baquet's hand, even though we're adversaries, even though he writes defamatory articles about me. I thought we'll have a moment of humanity. And Dean Baquet, the head of the New York Times, cowered away from me in the corner of that room holding his glass of Chardonnay. And at that moment, it's an amazing story in this book. I realized in that moment in space and time, this was October of 2018, the moment you stop caring about what they think of you is the moment you're actually free to be effective at what you're doing, to whether it's muckraking journalism or if you're, for example, a Republican politician. And I wonder, do these Republican politicians care too much about, and do people in the conservative movement care too much about what CNN thinks about them, or the New York Times? And of course the premise is yes, they do. And we need to abandon that fear. We need to reject that fear entirely so that we're liberated to speak the truth unspoken.
I mean, James, part of what you're doing is you're doing to them what they normally do to us unmolested, right? In other words, they run these humiliating attacks on Republicans and on conservatives. And what you're doing is you're saying, well, listen, they love to bring surveillance, and they bring the full apparatus of the state behind them. But you're like, listen, I'll take my little camera and get into their life. I'll take my little camera and get into their newsroom. I'll get into Google and I'll expose them. And let's see if they can endure the same kind of scrutiny that they put other people under. Now, do you see this as a good formula in a broader sense? Let me tell you what I mean. I just put out a tweet today saying, listen, if Republicans take the House and the Senate in 2022, why don't we do exactly what Nancy Pelosi did in 2018? She said, if we get the House, if we get the Senate, we will impeach Trump. Why don't we say the same of Biden? But see, interestingly, for Republicans, it's like, well, Biden has to do something that's going to make us, Biden's done plenty that makes it, we have plenty of cause to impeach him, but we have a different psychology in which we don't want to go tit for tat, don't want to do to them what they're doing to us. I think part of your broader clarion call is, listen, we should not be afraid of them. Why should we? What can they really in the end do to us?
Right. I think that's a very well astute point, particularly the last sentence you said. They have tremendous power and we are nothing. In this book, I say, we are nothing. this is true. They have the FBI, they have the paper of record, and frankly, the New York Times has no power. Their only power they have is by virtue of Google and Facebook giving them the algorithmic preferences in their articles. I don't want to call it journalism because they've defamed me and I've won in court in New York. We'll talk about that some other time. But the only power they have is the power that we give to them. And you think about it, and the first chapter of this book, Dinesh, is called Suffering. You might say, why the hell are you writing a journalism book and the first chapter is called Suffering? And here's why. Because in this life, we're going to suffer. I mean, society is in a bad place right now. I hope our society does not collapse. And the Jeffersonian ideals of information and informed consent, I hope these things don't collapse. But we're going to suffer either way. My premise is, let's do the right thing. Let's tell the truth. We've got a lot of good people in government. I mean, I think there are a lot of good people at the DOJ, for example. Now, whether they're willing to speak the truth is another thing. But that's where meaning comes in, and it's about the salvation of your own soul. It's about doing the right thing, and stop being afraid of these organs of propaganda. It's not that bad. I've lived through it, Dinesh. I've been arrested in New Orleans. I've been raided by the FBI in New York. I've been sued more than a dozen times. We've never lost a lawsuit. We overturned the law in Massachusetts at the First Circuit Court of Appeals. I've been deposed 15 times, and you know what? They fear depositions. They feared the discovery process of litigation. The truth is, there's only one reality out there. There's not multiple realities unless you're Stephen Hawking. There's only one truth, and you're not entitled to your own facts. So let's expose them, because as Whittaker Chambers writes in Witness, there's only one thing the communists fear, and that's being exposed. They don't fear the government. They certainly don't fear the Republicans. What they fear is sunlight. What they fear, as Justice Brandeis said, sunlight is the best disinfectant, whether it's through the discovery process of litigation or a hidden camera. This book is a handbook on how to do it and how to survive the arrows that you get. And by the way, all proceeds from this book goes to our nonprofit, Project Veritas, helps pay our journalists' salaries. Learn their stories, and the courage is contagious. Dinesh, I can't philosophize courage. I can't convince you people watching to go out and do this. The only way you're going to do it is if you see someone else do it. So I think there's going to be a mass movement of these truth tellers. I hope, Dinesh, people in Congress grow a pair. I don't have much faith there. I believe the outsiders and the whistleblowers are going to have to do it.
I mean, absolutely. That's beautifully said. And what I love about this book is I think it actually, I was expecting a compendium of the various kind of greatest hits of Project Veritas. But what you get to hear is the idea of what it takes to look at truth as something that you can cling to like a dog with a bone, and no matter who comes at you, you're going to hang on to that bone no matter what, because the truth itself matters more to you than anything that anybody can do to you. Thanks, James O'Keefe, for coming on the podcast. Great book, and you're doing great work. Keep it up.
Thanks, Dinesh.